right now, such as you can pay rent and eat if you eat at Burger King. So several problems in the food system, complex problems, largely invisible, and I would argue partly because there isn't an entity in the United States, especially at the local government level, that is responsible for ensuring that the food system, like any other infrastructure that is commonly known to planners, such as housing or transportation, etc., there is no entity that is overseeing the health of our food system. But that's not to say that nobody is thinking about it. A lot of people are thinking about it and are defining what it means for them to have a good food system. So a common definition of a good food system is one where food is affordable, healthful, culturally appropriate, and grown using environmentally just practices and environmentally safe practices. Such a food system is one that works for producers, for the farmers, for the processors, for distributors, and of course for those who eat it. It's important for a food system to work that the community members determine what their food system looks like. Within this big issue of malfunctioning food systems, planners are stepping up to the plate and playing important roles in helping fix food systems. Quickly, a brief history of what planners have done historically in the food system. Way back in the 1800s to early 1900s, planners did think about the food. They thought about sanitation, they thought about infectious disease, they thought about where markets were located in communities, and used planning strategies to make sure that infection did not spread, for example. But that preoccupation with sanitation and also with aesthetics to some degree is still reflected today in outdated zoning codes that preoccupy themselves with where food is being sold in what community, but not about what quality of the food is. Moving slightly forward to early 1900s, interestingly, at the first National City Planning Conference, the first annual conference, the keynote speaker was asked to identify the most important issues that face the planning profession. And he identified food as one of the important issues. At the time, though, planners thought a lot about efficiency in this system. They thought about individual components of the food system. For example, there was a lot of focus on increasing the transportation efficiency of food from producers to consumers through the location of terminal markets. However, at the time, there wasn't a lot of attention paid to the food system in its entirety. Food was also in the minds of people because of the economy. In 1917, for example, about 40% of our household budget was being spent on food. That's not the case anymore. Moving forward, in the 1930s and following that several decades after, United States food system transformed quite a bit through innovation in technology, modernization, and also the advent of food corporations that have really transformed how food is produced and distributed in communities. Jumping forward to 1990s, in 1997, a survey conducted of planners in the United States found that not a lot of planners thought that food was important. In fact, 38% of planners in 22 cities noted that food should be a matter of planning concern. They noted that there's limited awareness of the food system, and their work and what they reported as what they did didn't indicate that they were engaged with the food system. This was 1997. Moving forward to 2007, a survey of APA members was conducted by myself and some colleagues, and we asked planners, do you think food systems planning is a matter of importance to the profession? These were planners that represented multiple sectors, multiple areas of planning, and in fact, a few of them even identified themselves as food systems planners. And we asked them, do you think food systems planning is important? And in their response, we were incredibly surprised and pleased that 70% reported that food systems issues were a significant or top priority. And we asked them about different issues that they thought were important within food systems planning. And you have in front of you a list of those issues. And of course, not surprisingly, farmland preservation was identified as a top concern for food system planners. Promoting food safety, on the other hand, was not seen as important. So while we were pretty pleased with how planners are viewing the importance of food systems planning, we were also curious to know how engaged they were in actual food systems planning work. So we followed up with a question and asked, how are your organizations involved? And you'll see on this chart that their actual engagement and their organization's engagement is quite a bit less. The blue on the slide represents no engagement. Only 30% of these planners, APA members, reported their organizations were significantly involved in food work. And again, they reported farmland preservation to be one of the top areas of engagement and hunger prevention to be the lowest. So even though they claimed that they were not engaged in food systems work, I would argue that pretty much everything that planners do in their day-to-day work, whether it's transportation, whether it's land use planning, in all of those areas, we impact the food system. So when we make decisions or when we think about how land use should look like in a community in the future, we are making decisions about the impact on food production, including food retail, etc. So we were curious about this gap between planners' preference for being engaged in the food system and their actual engagement in the food system. So we asked them, what are the barriers? What prevents you from engaging in food systems work? And planners identified several areas that posed a challenge. The ones on top, not surprisingly, always is lack of resources. Planners don't have a lot of resources to engage in food systems planning, which is one more area of planning they have to think about now. They also talked about lack of staff trained in this area, lack of political support, etc. And then they talked about lack of community support as really the last, not the most important issue, but the least important issue. If you think about this conversely, it means that communities are actually pushing for change in the food system. So that's not a barrier, but lack of resources and lack of trained staff is a barrier for a lot of planning departments. But the planning profession has stepped up and really helped bridge that gap. Some recent milestones in the profession, and some of these are resources for those of you who are interested. The American Planning Association in 2007 adopted a policy guide on community and regional food planning, which provides direction to the profession on how planners might engage in food systems. APA has also published several planning advisory service reports on food systems planning in 2008, and then one more recently on urban agriculture. APA also has an interest group for those of you who are interested in learning more. It's called the Food Interest Group, where people share resources and have a network of planners working in food areas. Of course, APA conferences now include tracks and sessions on food systems planning, and most important for today's call is that several local governments, regional governments, municipal governments around the United States have adopted planning strategies to help rebuild sustainable food systems. So how can planners participate in this rebuilding of food systems? Well, food systems in general can be rebuilt through individual action, through projects and programs in the nonprofit world, but also through public policy, and that's where planners play a pretty significant role. We are, however, new to this work, but communities are not. So it's important for planners, no matter what municipality you're working in, to find out what food systems work is already happening in their community, even though community members may not call it food systems planning work. So as an example, from Buffalo, New York, where I'm speaking, and it's sunny and beautiful, just in case anybody is wondering, in Buffalo, New York, There are about 15,000 vacant lots, and nonprofit groups have taken up these vacant lots and treated them as an opportunity by establishing urban farms and community gardens. We have about 70 functional community gardens in Buffalo. These nonprofit groups, this one is called the Massachusetts Avenue Project, engages youth and engages in community development work, promotes food security, but also economic development through food entrepreneurship. This is an example of a value-added product that is being produced in some of the neighborhoods in Buffalo. Many of these groups are engaging in producing fish within neighborhoods where there is a lot of abandoned land. This is an example of a greenhouse also in Buffalo. And finally, these programs and nonprofit groups and community groups are recognizing that their programs and their efforts sometimes run into barriers, policy barriers, that need to be addressed before they can continue to do what they need to do, such as grow food or process food, do other food systems related work. So increasingly, a lot of community groups, again, this is an example from Buffalo, they're engaging their municipal government in food systems issue. In Buffalo, New York, for example, these youth are engaged in conversations around redesign of our zoning code, which has not been which is being redesigned after about 60 years, to see how the zoning code can support the production of food within the city of Buffalo. The point of this is that even though there are lots of planning strategies, and I will go through them very briefly, that many of these planning strategies have to be informed by work that is already happening on the ground in these communities. And a good first step is to educate one's own self about what those projects are in the communities. So what are some planning strategies and what are communities doing? So there are, in my mind, many different ways that planners can engage in the food system. Here I've just shared 3 particular areas. One, most familiar to planners, is through the art of plan making. A number of communities are preparing plans that address the health of food systems, that identify bottlenecks in the food system, missed opportunities and problems, and then propose solutions for how these food systems can be improved. In addition to plans, a lot of municipalities are adopting regulations and ordinances that support the creation of a healthy and well-functioning food system. And some communities are also dedicating fiscal resources to the creation of food systems and are experimenting with pretty innovative but also traditional tools. So within the plans, how can you support food systems? After my presentation, you will hear from Alison Hastings on a really good example of such a plan at a regional level in greater depth. So I will give a very broad overview of the sorts of strategies communities are using around the country. A number of communities at regional scales, municipal scales, county scales, including as well as neighborhood scales, are preparing stand-alone food system plans that tackle bottlenecks in production, processing, distribution of food, consumption of food, and lay out a course of action for the future for how these food systems can be improved. Some communities don't tackle the food system in its entirety, but develop plans for a particular piece of the food system. For example, in Buffalo, New York, there is a plan for community gardens. Minneapolis, Minnesota has recently adopted an urban agriculture plan. All of those are plans for pieces of the food system. The most common and most prevalent, and perhaps the one that may be the easiest for a lot of planners to think about in their own communities, is how food systems can be tackled in their official plans. These can be comprehensive plans, these can be land use plans, these can be environmental and climate change plans. So on the slide you have a list of some examples that I took from around the country. Boise, Idaho, New Orleans, Louisiana, Harrison County, Mississippi, Dane County, Wisconsin. Really, it represents many different parts of the country. The West, the South, Midwest, communities are including food concerns within their comprehensive plans. Food shows up either throughout the entire plan or it might show up in particular elements. As you can see on the slide, it often shows up in agriculture and natural resource elements, but increasingly we're also seeing communities include an element on health in their comprehensive plans, and food often shows up in that health element. A number of communities are also addressing food in their environment and climate change plans because, as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, the state of our food system has significant implications for our environment. Moving on to regulations, a number of municipalities are experimenting with how zoning ordinances or bylaws may be amended to support a healthier food system. Kansas City, for example, has adopted a zoning ordinance that supports urban agriculture, permits urban agriculture, as well as the sale of produce in residential areas. A number of other municipalities regulate fast food. Some of them completely prohibit fast food. In addition to that sort of zoning ordinance change, we're also seeing what are popularly called chicken and bee ordinances. A number of municipalities are now allowing raising of chickens within cities, which was not common until recently in many places. 3 examples provided to you are Madison, Buffalo, and Cleveland. In Buffalo, for example, you can have 4 chickens per lot, and there are setback requirements, etc. Some municipalities are trying to promote access to healthy fruits and vegetables by incorporating conditions into the development review process, while other municipalities, such as New York City, has used the notion of density bonuses to incentivize the availability of fresh fruits and vegetables in commercial areas, in retail stores. Other municipalities are streamlining permitting processes for healthy mobile vending. So, for example, if your municipality might consider permitting, if it allows mobile vending, to make it cheaper or easier for a vendor who's selling fruits and vegetables to get access to permits. Other municipalities, New York City again as an example, has reduced parking requirements for stores that sell fresh fruits and vegetables. Finally, on the fiscal end, one of the not common but popular programs that is emerging around the country is something called Fresh Food Financing Initiative. A lot of municipalities are experimenting with the use of financial tools, loans, and grants to support small grocery store owners as well as large supermarket owners to provide fresh fruits and vegetables. This is really kicked off by a really innovative program in Philadelphia known as the Fresh Food Financing Initiative, which was then later replicated in several other parts of the country. And of course, there are traditional tools that are familiar to planners, such as the use of purchase of development rights and other farmland preservation tools for supporting production of food. There are a lot of details and a lot of specific language. I've received a lot of requests asking for language that is used in comprehensive plans and specific definitions and standards that are used in zoning ordinances and a lot of details. So I don't have sufficient time to go through those details in this presentation, but I will point you to a resource, a recent policy brief called Planning to Eat, and it's a compilation of innovative local government plans and policies throughout the United States. It includes direct excerpts and definitions and regulations that might be helpful to you. If you are interested in these, I believe we are going to email this resource out at the end of this presentation to everyone who is on this call. So watch out for it. It's coming your way. With that, I will end and be happy to take questions, and I will hand it over to the next presenter, Alison Hastings.
Hi, everyone. This is Alison Hastings from Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. and hopefully my screen is up and you can see it. So thank you very much, Dr. Raja, for that presentation. I'm very excited to present alongside you because you're very knowledgeable and you've been doing this a lot longer than me. And also I'm a little bit intimidated because you sound so eloquent and you have so much depth of knowledge. So what I'm going to talk about is kind of drilling down a little bit more onto planning for Greater Philadelphia's food system. My presentation today, here's a little bit of an outline of some of the stuff that I'm going to cover. So who is the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, DVRPC? Why we're interested in the food system. Highlights from some of our food system planning projects that we've been undertaking since 2008. And then I was asked to speak briefly on what some other local governments are doing, so examples around food system planning from around the country. And I have two very brief examples about that. So an overview of DVRPC, we're Philadelphia's metropolitan planning organization, and we were created in 1965. And this is a map of the 9-county region that we serve. We serve parts of southeastern PA as well as southern New Jersey, and the little blue line in between is the Delaware River. So we serve 2 states, which is interesting. Also something that's important to know is that both states, Pennsylvania and New Jersey, are home rule states. So while we prioritize transportation funding, we can only really advocate on land use planning. So that's a lot of our staff's time spent working with municipalities and counties on land use planning that coordinates transportation investments, strengthens the economy, and protects the environment. So here is a map of where the DVRPC service area, that yellow part in the center, where it is along the East Coast. So you can see some of our neighbors. We're really close to Wilmington, Delaware, New York City, Baltimore, Maryland. And a lot of the work that we're doing around food system planning extends beyond DVRPC service area because there's so many agricultural resources right outside of our service area, right outside of our metro area. But then we also have to realize and understand that we're part of a mega region, which is the Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC corridor, which is really important for food system planning. So why is DVRPC interested in the food system planning? We get this question a lot. And we think food cuts across all issue areas. Again, we were founded and we have a mission to coordinate transportation, land use, the economy, and the environment. And I think Dr. Raja talked about why food is really a part of all of those things. I'm going to go briefly into why it's important for Greater Philadelphia. So first, when it comes to transportation, food relies on an efficient transportation system, and Greater Philadelphia has a multimodal system with both freight networks, a port system, rail, as well as interstate highway systems that move freight really quickly. But then we also have a multimodal transportation network for people. So we move people throughout the region with multiple options of transportation, including public transit, walking trails, as well as our road infrastructure. And this is something really important to think about when we're thinking about food. Philadelphia, because of where it's located along the East Coast, as well as because we're a lower congested area, especially compared to other parts of the United States and our neighbors, New York and DC, we've become a very large port for bananas and other products originating from the South America, Southern Hemisphere. So 14 million tons of food moved through Greater Philadelphia in 2002. When it comes to land use, food also takes up a lot of land, and we're really thinking about the future of how we're going to use our land. What does the region look like in 2035, 2040? And we have to think about in the future, if there's no farms, there might be no food. So farmland preservation has been a large part of our organization over the last 15 to 20 years, and if anything, it's becoming a bigger part of what we talk about. When it comes to the economy, DVRPC is also recognized as an economic development agency in a certain way. We maintain the region's comprehensive economic development strategy, the SEDS. As an agency that does long-range planning, we're thinking about a post-fossil fuel transportation network and a post-fossil fuel economy. So that means we have to consider how much of our food system relies on fossil fuel inputs. So this chart that I have on the screen is the U.S. Consumer Price Index from March 2010 to March 2011. So the CPI is an economic indicator calculated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they consider all different types of consumer expenses like housing, transportation, medical care. So the blue line on this chart shows the percentage change of all consumer items. You can see how it goes up and down. The red line shows the price index of all consumer items minus food and energy. So it's a much more stable, much more flat line. And you could argue that food and energy are very similar. Food is our body's energy. Food is reliant on energy, especially fossil fuel inputs, fertilizers, and feed and transporting it from farm to consumer. And additionally, in an economic climate in which we are in, where most employed people are seeing a reduction in incomes or flat incomes, the volatility of necessary items such as food and energy means that we'll be taking up a bigger portion of our incomes and spending less on everything else, including housing. So we think this is a very big thing to think about when you're thinking about economic competitiveness. And when it comes to regional food systems, Greater Philadelphia is thinking about how building a stronger regional food system, having more food producers located closer to where we live, may be a way to buffer the region from these volatile prices and food prices. When it comes to the environment, again, we've had a long tradition of environmental planning at DVRPC. So this chart, or this map, shows some of the analysis that we've done. Farm acreage and farming in a 100-mile food shed around Greater Philadelphia, so drawing a 100-mile radius from a center point in Philadelphia around the region, captures a very large area. So in this area, in between 1950 to 2001, this area lost over half, 58%, of its agricultural land in the 100-mile food shed. So that's a tremendous amount of agricultural land that we've lost. And this chart specifically shows the red is the agricultural soil that we lost in just since 2001. So we've lost over half of our agricultural land, but we've lost a tremendous amount in the late 1990s, early 2000s. However, we still have, out of this area that's very densely populated and has lots of sprawling development, 37% of it is still undeveloped land that is considered to be important agricultural soils. So we still have a lot of great agricultural resources and agricultural production happening close to our metropolitan areas. So that's a little bit about why DVRPC is interested in food system planning, and now I'm going to talk about what we have done so far. So in 2010, we released the Greater Philadelphia Food System Study, and we followed that up with a plan where we looked at what are the things that we want to change, what are our recommendations, and we published that in February 2011. And so I'm going to go over some of the highlights from those two publications. First, in the 2010 Food System Study, we started with non-planners, stakeholders who had much more content knowledge about the food system or their part of the food system than us, and they actually created our scope of work. So going back to what Dr. Raja said about maybe taking the first step is to have an understanding of what's going on already. That's what we decided to do when we jumped into food system work. We knew that it wasn't our expertise and that there was a lot of things already happening in Philadelphia. So we went to content experts, experts in their own right, to ask them how we could help, and they actually created a scope of work for us. The 2010 Food System Study was built on a lot of intensive surveying, and we basically did an assessment for a large area, the regional food system, that 100-mile food shed. We assessed ag resources, food freight distribution, the food economy, and social capital. What are our social resources? For the 2011 Food System Plan, we followed up what we learned from the study, and we, with a larger group of stakeholders, of content experts, we asked them to identify values, come up with aspirational goals, and then identify indicators in which we can monitor the overall regional food system's progress towards these values and goals. And then we also identified far-reaching recommendations, and we had an opportunity to prioritize recommendations, which I'll get into in a little bit later. So as part of our analysis goes, this is a map from U.S. Department of Agriculture 2007 Census of Agriculture. We mapped what, out of all the counties that make up like a 100-mile food shed around Greater Philadelphia, what types of commodities are they specializing in? So dark green in that center is veggies, and Philadelphia County, Salem County, Gloucester counties in New Jersey, they have a top commodity. They get a lot of value, their farmers get a lot of value from growing veggies. That dark purple right next to Gloucester and Salem County, that's Atlantic County, and that's berries. You might see some white spread throughout, and that's milk and cheese, like Lancaster County in Pennsylvania is a big producer of milk and cheese. And then there's a lot of yellow at the outer edges, and that's poultry and eggs. But that light purple pink that you see everywhere, that is nursery products as well as mushrooms. Mushrooms are also categorized in that. But nursery products like sod, landscaping material, things that you plant in front of your house, you see that all throughout this food shed, and that let us know that this area definitely, not only from the landscape level, isn't underneath a lot of pressures of sprawl, but agriculture also transitions to serve its populations. It's where demand is, and so there's a lot of demand near suburbanizing areas for nursery products and sod. It's just something important to know about, that the food system and that agriculture is not just about food, it's about a lot of other parts of the agricultural industry. And a big finding from our food system study was that the 100-mile food shed that we looked at that was beyond DVRPC's 9 counties does not have enough agricultural land to serve even the population of Greater Philadelphia, which is 5.5 million people, let alone the over 30 million people who live there. But that's okay, because our study and our plan, we're not looking at being like self-sufficient. We were looking at, what is a food system and what is the difference between the international food system and the regional food system, and how do they work together. So moving on to the plan, we decided to have a conversation with our stakeholders to talk about what they wanted to see in a regional food system, because the international, the globalized, however you want to phrase it, the industrialized food system gets a lot of food to a lot of people really quickly. So what is different about a regional food system? So we talked about values and goals, and these are aspirational. And again, we were doing this with non-planners, which was a really interesting exercise to do. So these are the values and goals that they came up with. We want a food system that values farming and encourages sustainable agriculture practices. Food is already a large part of the economy, so how can we increase healthier food options and encourage livable wages? When it comes to health, we want a food system that makes us healthier. When it comes to fairness, we want to see that where an individual lives can detrimentally affect their health, so we want to see more fairness in the food system. We want a system that protects the environment rather than compromises it. And private, public, nonprofit sectors and individuals want and need to work together to achieve a food system that embodies our values. So as I said before, we did a few indicators, and I'm going to show 2 just as examples of the type of indicators that we'll be tracking long term. And this one is related to economic development. So this chart looks at food sector employment in Greater Philadelphia, looking at all different sectors of employment. We pulled out food-specific ones. And so it has shown that food sector employment has grown by 4.4% between 2001 and 2008. And this compares to a 2.5% increase in overall employment. So food sector employment is growing slightly faster than other types of employment. And we wanted to say that this is probably not a full or accurate capture of all the food sector employment that happens in Greater Philadelphia, because a lot of the food sector is a part of the informal economy. So we can only get, what's reported to the government. So that's so there's probably many more workers in the food system than 270,000 in Greater Philadelphia. We're estimating closer to 300,000 or more. And here's another slide related to our fairness goal and value. This looks at household food insecurity for the whole states of New Jersey and PA. DVRPC and many of our stakeholders define food insecurity as a person or a household not knowing where their next meal is coming from. And so just to put that in perspective, like, I don't know what I'm going to eat for dinner tonight, right? I haven't decided what I'm going to eat for dinner tonight, but I know I'm going to eat dinner tonight. So that's a big kind of way to define food insecurity. I think it puts it in a very realistic term. So since 1995, USDA has monitored household food security through an annual survey, and this chart shows that both states have seen a large increase, 38%, in the number of households suffering from food insecurity. So it's gone up dramatically between 2001 and 2008, and we anticipate that it will go, continue to increase when we have more up-to-date data available. So the stakeholder committee came up with 52 recommendations. I think we gave them over 100 recommendations, and we asked them to prioritize. So 52 rose to the top, and from there we were able to see their top priorities. And so their top priorities for each value category. For farming and sustainable ag, our stakeholders want to see farmland more affordable through a range of new business models like lease agreements. So going beyond farmland preservation, what are some other opportunities? When it comes to ecological stewardship, our stakeholders recommended implementing market-based solutions that protect natural resources, such as marketing programs or new brand development, so relying less on regulation or less on direct payments to farmers. Or not relying less, but looking at different alternatives for that. When it comes to fairness, our stakeholders said that establishing a long-term eating habits and healthy behaviors through food choices, education, and activities in local schools will create customers for our local food providers in the future. So that's going to the idea that educating school children will create long-term healthy behaviors that will last them into their lifetime. For economic development, our stakeholders wanted to see more business development strategies ranging from training programs to financing innovations that reduce the barriers of entry for entrepreneurs and farmers. Around health, our stakeholders recommended that there should be an increase in public awareness of healthy food through interactive programs and educational experiences, so pushing kind of how public health gets its message out there. And then around the value of collaboration, the stakeholders want DVRPC to continue to convene the Food System Stakeholder Committee. So that is a good transition to what DVRPC is doing now. Oh, sorry, these are coming up out of order. Sorry. So first, we are continuing to convene the stakeholder committee. As long as people want to get together and share ideas and learn together, we're willing to host that committee. And it's really their committee, content experts, food system professionals, however you want to name it, farmer advocates. It's really their committee, so they get to shape the agendas and decide on what we should learn about, and it's an opportunity to network. Then we were also very fortunate to work with one of our large regional foundations here, the William Penn Foundation, to create a financial and technical assistance initiative. And that was really helpful because we started that program while we were coming up with recommendations, so we were able to implement a few of those key recommendations. In the future, we're going to continue to monitor the implementation of the food system plan, and we'll assist with others' efforts whenever possible, so supporting a nonprofit's application for a grant program or actually meeting and discussing about an issue or a problem. DVRPC will help when possible. And then what we're doing, how we're adding our planning knowledge to the issue is that we'll be long-term investigating the roles of local governments in the regional food system. So here's an example of one of the grants that we made with the William Penn Foundation, and we made it to the Greater Philadelphia Tourism Marketing Corporation, GPTMC, and this is a screenshot of their website. And so GPTMC markets all over the country, all over the world to get people to visit Greater Philadelphia. And so we thought it would be really neat if they could start pushing local food and making Philadelphia known as a food destination and celebrating our local artisans and our local farmers and what makes food around Greater Philadelphia so different and so unique. And so this has GPTMC, being the experts that they are in marketing and tourism, have made an amazing Philly homegrown campaign that there's lots of programs associated with it. So they do a lot of programming. They work with stakeholders who also do education. And they have a really deep website with a lot of content about what's going on in the local food system. So this is a really neat project. Everyone should visit food.visitphilly.com. So there's many reasons why local governments address food system issues, and this is how I'll conclude my presentation. We are finding that local governments that we work with are wanting to address food system activities because in many communities it makes up a large percentage of their land use, and in certain communities it creates a lot of economic value. So again, by the numbers, by the published numbers by like Bureau of Labor Statistics, the food system might only make up like 10 to 15%, but we think that in many communities it's probably 30% or more of all economic activities. Access to affordable, safe, fresh, and healthy food is a benefit for residents and communities, so we're seeing a lot of governments respond to social equity and public health issues, like that's where they're coming at this issue from. And also, local food builds local economy. So a downtown's restaurant row is a key driver of that small main street's economic success. Farmers markets are becoming the new town squares. There are now places where people interact, and it's something that we didn't have 10, 15 years ago that more and more communities want. So looking at specifically what some local governments are doing, here's an example from State College, Pennsylvania, which is outside of the Greater Philadelphia area, outside of DVRPC's service area. It's where Penn State is, but we like this example because it's a realistic example. So in 2007, State College, in partnership with the county that they are in, their Solid Waste Authority in Penn State, they were awarded a $250,000 grant to do a pilot program. And the pilot program was to do a commercial and residential curbside food scrap collection program. So collection started in January 2010, and it was in response to a study that was done in 2003 about waste composition. The study determined that 15% of material being sent to landfills in north central PA, where State College is, was food waste, and that was higher than any other material that they tracked. So they thought that this was a good point of intervention if they wanted to reduce their landfill tipping. So the pilot phase included 649 residences and 9 businesses. And pre-consumer food scraps were collected and brought to the borough's yard waste facility and mixed with other yard debris and converted into usable compost. They diverted 136 tons in the I guess, the 17-month pilot study, and they saved $9,500 in transfer station costs, but they estimate that the program cost them $44,000 in staff time to operate the program. So we like this example because it's realistic. It was small enough where a lot of the municipalities that we serve can identify with it, and also the prices weren't totally astronomically out of whack. So today, the State College thinks it was a success. The actual staff there, they would like to see it continue, but with financial, uncertainties that all local governments are facing, they don't know. So in December 2011, the Borough Council will adopt a budget for 2012. So the future of continuing the project is dependent on budget allocation. But again, we like this example because it's realistic, and it's a small borough. And New Jersey and Pennsylvania have a lot of small boroughs. Then going to DVRPC service area, again, we serve 9 counties. Burlington County in New Jersey is one of those counties. They have a really great farmland preservation program, and we thought it'd be good to highlight this. So it's one of the state's first it's New Jersey's first farmland preservation program. It relies on public and private investment, and it's invested over $110 million over the past 25 years at preserving farms. And what's interesting about Burlington County is that they did a 10-year comprehensive farmland preservation plan, and they're going to reach their goals of preserving additional acreage very, very soon. So what does a farmland preservation program look like once it's attained its goals? So this is, I think, where Burlington County is really kind of leading the edge on thinking about food system planning. So they partnered with American Farmland Trust to do some model ordinances, and here's an example of some of their model ordinances that they drafted. And I believe they're all available on Burlington County's website if you were interested in it. And again, it's kind of going back to what Dr. Raja said about how local governments can inadvertently put up some barriers, but also put in some policies or incentives for food system activities. And I think these model ordinances are a perfect example of removing barriers as well as creating incentives for more agricultural production. And also what's interesting about Burlington County is that they bought a farm in 2005, a historic dairy farm that was really important to the community that it was in. It was one of the last farms in this particular township. They purchased the farm outright, and they decided, like, what are we going to do with this farm? They decided to create the Burlington County Community Agricultural Center, which opened in 2007. And it's a really neat place. It's becoming a place for the whole county to gather around. They have a CSA farm that participants can buy shares in. They host a weekly farmers market that's covered, so even if it's raining, it's a very pleasant place to be. And then it's also a great place to demonstrate different types of environmental design, environmental stewardship. So Rutgers Extension built a beautiful rain garden in it, and they have a lot more plans for where the Community Agricultural Center could go in the future. I think a lot of people would say this is a big success. So that concludes my presentation. I think I will turn it back over to Chris or Brittany.
Hi, Allison. Thank you for the presentation, Samina as well. This is Brittany. I'm going to be handling the question and answer session. So our first question comes in from Douglas Martin. Have there been any legal challenges or hurdles associated with regulations addressing healthy food systems, such as prohibiting fast food, requiring fresh fruits and vegetables in convenience, or waiver of permits?
I can take a stab at that. The examples that are provided in the policy brief that you can all download from the archive, none of those have been challenged in court, but we do have examples of long-standing examples. These are not new, where fast food has been regulated, sticking with fast food for a minute. So the town of Concord, Massachusetts, I believe, for example, has an outright ban on fast food, and it's been there. It's not a new thing. It's been there for quite a while. So a lot of ordinances used to ban and regulate fast food, not because of health reasons, but because of aesthetics, traffic impacts, and other reasons that that planners thought were important. And I have not heard of any recent challenge in the courts around these regulations, but there are some legal opinions that say that if you regulate fast food, for example, for health purposes, that is more clearly serving the public interest than regulating it for, say, aesthetic purposes. So it's a little bit early, but I think the opinion out there is that if it's done for health purposes to protect public health, which is really one of the fundamental reasons why zoning is upheld in the courts, we should be okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our next question comes in from Alan Frank. How do you align your concern with current food affordability with the fact that food is more affordable now than ever, i.e. individuals spent 40 to 60% of their budgets on food in the early 1900s?
I'll start with that, but I think Alison might have some insight into it based on Delaware Valley as well. So even though it is true that we spend a smaller proportion of our budget on food today, what we buy may not classify as food the same way it classified back when we paid 40% of our budget, when we spent 40% of our budget on food. So let me give an example. What we save at the grocery store and what we save maybe at the supermarket, we actually end up paying that price just at a different location. It happens to be our doctor's office. So right now we pay, if we turn the food price into nutrient price, we pay about 6 times as much to derive energy from a carrot as we do to derive energy from a chocolate chip cookie. So even though it's cheaper, we're not getting the nutrition value for the money that we are spending.
And I would say this isn't a direct answer, but I think the things about the industrialized food system, we don't necessarily want to lose all of that. You know, the food system of the future, we're going to need a mix of different kinds of production practices, different types of producers, different types of retail outlets. We just need a different mix. Regarding food affordability, so that wasn't directly answering the question, but answering food affordability, yes, that we spend a lot less on food now has done a great thing for our economy. It's created more jobs. It's created a lot of, it's created women to leave the household and be able to have jobs besides cooking all day. So there's been a lot of benefits to the industrialized food system or the modern food system. So I don't think regional food systems are advocating for a turn back the clock type thing, or advocating for us to spend more money, that much more money on food. I think the future of food, we will be spending more money on food because it is going to get more expensive. There's going to be more people everywhere, and possibly less land to produce it, less people to produce it. So it's something just very much to think about. And if we start to start paying for the real cost of food, the environmental externalities that we don't always pay for when we buy, like, I'll use Cheez-Its as an example. I love Cheez-Its. You know, we're going to start paying for those externalities very soon in other ways, whether it's through the food price or through infrastructure cost, remediation processes, that, you know, all the other things associated with living in a modernized world.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our next question comes in from Eric Labrie, and early in the presentation, Dr. Raja, you mentioned that food waste when placed in landfills is an environmental problem. Can you explain why biodegradable food waste is an environmental concern in landfills?
It's not that biodegradable food is a concern. It's that it's a lost opportunity. Because that food waste could be potentially used to compost and replenish soil. So I'll use urban areas as an example. There are some some solid waste disposal companies that are using solid waste through a lot of different methods that I can't even begin to explain, but they are using it to convert it to generating electricity as well as to use in the production of hydroponic tomatoes, etc. I think of it more as a lost opportunity for reclaiming that food waste into the food production process. But yeah, because it's biodegradable, it will get decomposed, but we will have lost the opportunity of utilizing it to replenish our soils. In urban areas, for example, soil quality is pretty poor. And all the food that's generated in urban areas, if it's not utilized, we're just wasting a lot of a natural resource that we have.
Okay, great. Our next question comes in from Stephen Curlin. He would like you to go into more detail on the distribution of food other than the transportation costs, and also more details on the waste. You used to maybe go into detail on the use of digesters at the farm level for recycling.
So more detail on the distribution end. When I think about food distribution, and I think Alison maybe can help on this one, food distribution happens in multiple different ways. Food distribution can happen through the market mechanism, which is through grocery stores, through supermarkets, through restaurants. All of those are food distribution mechanisms. In addition to that, food can also get distributed through institutions. So our school systems, for example, are responsible for feeding a good proportion of kids in the United States. So there are many different ways to distribute food. There's a lot of interest in the food systems planning work to see if there are any distribution mechanisms that close the distance between producers and consumers. So those alternatives and some examples, I think Alison mentioned these. One of them, for example, which is innovative, is the idea of a community-supported agriculture effort where farmers directly sell their produce to consumers. So there is no middle, there's no wholesaler, there's no other retailer. It's shortening the distance between the producer and the consumer. And then there are other examples as well. So any sort of direct marketing efforts are an alternative distribution mechanism. On the digester front, I don't have enough details of how local governments have supported it, but I can point you to innovative projects. So one of the examples that you might want to look at is the Growing Power project in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that is what's called a closed-loop energy system. They grow their own food. They reclaim waste from the food. They have a large aquaponics facility, so the food waste that is generated is actually used to feed the fish in the aquaponics facility. And they have an on-site open-air composting, but they're also experimenting with other kinds of food disposal methods. I'm sorry, that's not my area of expertise, but I would point you to Growing Power. Alison, do you have other examples?
I mean, there's USDA did have maybe a few years ago had a push to do more on-farm electricity generation, and a digester could do that. So having farmers reduce their costs by producing more of their own energy, that would be, some proponents say that would be a huge help in keeping farms profitable, because they can't always control the cost of inputs, and a lot of people call farmers price takers instead of price makers. So their cost of inputs might be going up, but they can't necessarily get more for the apple that they're growing if they're selling to a wholesaler who has a set price, or they're in a contract with a processor who's already said they're going to pay them this much. So there has been a push to do more on-farm power generation, and that would be an example of, of a digester that turns food into methane that you could then use. Regarding like the distribution, I mean, that's a huge question that a lot of people are discussing about the distribution network of the United States as a whole. Between there's so much food that moves throughout the whole country all the time. If you think about like what you see when you're driving a highway or driving a city street, a lot of delivery trucks that you see at certain times of the day are delivering food. A lot of tractor trailers that you see on interstate highways are delivering food. It's a very complicated system that's always moving, and some of the most interesting people to talk to are truckers, I find, because they kind of understand the economic landscape of the United States in a really interesting way. Like a lot of food warehouses that serve New York City are located like along the New Jersey Turnpike in cheaper areas, but they can get into New York City really quickly. And then a lot of food warehouses that serve like Greater Philadelphia and New York City are located in central PA, right off of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So that's, I don't know, that's a long conversation. We could do a whole session on kind of the interesting things about food distribution, and then all the different types of different models that that different organizations, different individuals are experimenting with.
Okay, great. Our next question comes in from Jim Lyson, and he's asking, are either of you familiar with the Veggie Fruit Prescription Program, where family health care providers write prescriptions to families for vegetables and fruit to be filled free at the local farmers market? This program links food security and health care together.
Not that specific one, but yeah, there are similar programs in other places, and there are other ways that both local governments, but also federal government is trying to incentivize the purchase of fruits and vegetables. But that's a great program, except if there is no place to buy fruits and vegetables at the local farmers market. I mean, if there are no farmers markets and stores to buy fruits and vegetables, that kind of programming is hampered, which really makes it important to think about the role of planning and policy to support these programming. I think it's a great program, but I think planners and policymakers have to think about the environment within which these people live and have to make these choices. Alison.
There's an example in Philadelphia that just recently launched, the St. Christopher's Children's Hospital, which serves a part of North Philly. They just launched a Veggie RX program, and it's linked to a farmers market type program, like a CSA program that the St. Christopher's Foundation for Children. So St. Christopher's Hospital has a foundation. That foundation runs that CSA program. So it's like an RX to get to participate in that program and get fresh fruits and vegetables into your diet, and here's how you're going to do it. So that's a really neat way of tying the hospital and then their operational foundation. Their two missions can sometimes align, and that's an example of how it's aligning.
This isn't directly related to the question, but it does occur to me that planners might be interested in knowing that when that kind of programming is put in place, it has a pretty significant impact, economic impact on the local food system. So for example, if the demand for fruits and vegetables goes up by 20% in a community, you're likely to see an impact on purchase. If there is an emphasis on local purchasing, you can capture those dollars locally within a region and see a spillover. There's been studies done in Iowa recently, and we're doing one in Erie County right now, to measure what the multiplier effect would be if people were to indeed get their 5 servings of fruits and vegetables from their region. Not that it'll be 100% regional, but if we were to increase that proportion, what would be the consequence for the economy? And I think there's a tremendous opportunity to both improve health but also economic health.
Great. Our next question comes in from Douglas Martin. Have you seen any use of farming waste to assist in biofuel production or other usable resources which benefits a community and environment?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Have either of you seen any use of farming waste to assist in biofuel production or other usable resources which benefit a community or environment?
I mean, again, like, you know, there was a push to have more farmers create their own energy. So that would be an example of a farmer using some of their waste, some of their, I guess, glut product or spoiled product or, you know, what have you, and create it into biofuel that would then run their equipment. So there are, like, you know, a handful of examples of that around Pennsylvania, around the country, I'm sure. It's very expensive to get that kind of system up and running. So that I think that's why the USDA was supporting it with like grants and that type of thing. In Philadelphia specifically, Greens Grow, they have a biofuel, I guess, generator. They run their pickup trucks on it, and they get their biofuel from restaurant grease traps. So in the area that their neighborhood, they go around to certain restaurants and collect the grease and use it to run some of their vehicles. And I think they did receive a grant to get that system up and running.
Okay, great. Well, that's actually the last question we have. So if you do have any other lingering questions that you want to ask, you can always contact Dr. Samina Raja and Alison Hastings at their email addresses that are listed up on the screen right now. So you want to take a moment and just jot those down. Thank you so much, Dr. Raja and Alison, for a great presentation. I think everybody really enjoyed it. And for those of you who are still in attendance, I'm going to go over a few reminders in just a few moments.
Thank you.
All right, for those of you who are still with us, to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM. Select today's date, which is Friday, October 28th, and then select today's webcast, Menu for a Healthy Food System. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. Also, we are recording today's session, so you will be able to find a recording of this webcast along with a 6-slide per page PDF at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. This does conclude today's session, and I want to thank everyone again for attending.